Some mysteries are buried so deep that the world has forgotten they ever existed. We dig through the past to bring these cold cases back to life with stunning visuals and gripping narrative intensity. Click subscribe now to help us uncover the secrets of the past.
On September 6, 2024, at my son's funeral, his business partner leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, Mrs. Hayes. I'll take better care of that $12 million than Marcus ever could. He just didn't have the stomach for real business. My name is Dorothy Mae Hayes. I am 67 years old. I didn't cry. I didn't turn around. I simply said, 'Is that right?' And then I decided I was going to bury more than my son that day. If you're watching from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far the story has traveled. Please stay with me until the very end, because what I'm about to tell you didn't start at that funeral. It started long before I understood what was happening right in front of my eyes. The morning of September 6th was warm for Memphis, that heavy southern heat that wraps around your shoulders like a wool coat you can't take off. Calvary Baptist Church sits on a corner lot on South Parkway, a big red brick building where my mother was married, where I was baptized, where I brought Marcus home the Sunday after he was born. The parking lot was full an hour before the service started. My son was known in this city. He built something here. I sat in my car for almost 15 minutes before I could make myself walk in. My daughter-in-law, Priya, had offered to ride with me that morning. I told her no. Priya had offered to ride with me that morning. Even then, though I couldn't have explained why, something in me said no. Inside, the church smelled like roses and wood polish and the faint trace of the lemon oil the deacons use on the pews every Saturday. The choir loft was full, even though nobody was singing yet. People filled the rows, murmuring softly, dabbing at their eyes. My son lay in a dark walnut casket at the front of the sanctuary, flanked by two enormous arrangements of white lilies. Marcus Raymond Hayes, born January 9th, 1983. Died September 3rd, 2024. 41 years old. He'd been driving home from a late meeting when it happened. A single-car accident on I-2 just past the Lamar Avenue exit. The police said he lost control. The road was dry. There was no other car. The report said he may have fallen asleep at the wheel. Marcus had been working 18-hour days for months, negotiating the biggest deal of his career, a $12 million franchise agreement that would have taken his barbecue restaurant chain from 3 locations to 22 across 5 southern states. I stood in the center aisle and looked at my boy in that casket. He was wearing the charcoal suit he'd bought for the ribbon cutting at his first restaurant 14 years ago. His hands were folded over his chest. He looked peaceful. He looked the way people always look in caskets, like they're sleeping. Like if you touched their shoulder and called their name, they might open their eyes. I touched his hand. "I'm here, baby," I whispered. "Mama's here." I'd spent 35 years teaching 4th grade in the Memphis city schools. I knew every kind of heartbreak a human face could hold. I'd sat with parents who'd lost children. I delivered hard news with steady hands and a calm voice because someone had to, because someone always has to. I knew what grief looked like from the outside. What I felt standing there was something else entirely. It was the feeling that something was wrong. Not just the grief, not just the loss. Something specifically, pointedly wrong. The service began at 11 o'clock. Pastor Jerome Williams, who had known Marcus since he was a boy in Sunday school, spoke first. He talked about Marcus's generosity, the way he donated meals from his restaurants every Thanksgiving for the past 8 years, the scholarship fund he'd set up for Memphis kids who wanted to study culinary arts. He talked about what it means to build something from nothing, to take your grandmother's recipes and your mother's work ethic and turn them into something that fed a community. I sat in the front pew. My best friend Gloria Washington was on my right. Gloria and I have been friends since we both started teaching at Treadwell Elementary in 1987. She is 72 years old, sharp as a tack, and she does not miss a single thing. She took my hand and held it tight. On my left sat Priya. She wore a black wrap dress. Her dark hair was down and her makeup was careful and understated. She cried at the right moments, reached for tissues, pressed her lips together the way a widow is supposed to. She was 38 years old and she had been married to my son for 6 years. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She checked her phone once during the eulogy. Just a quick glance, screen tilted away from me. Her left hand rested in her lap. No wedding ring. I looked at her finger and saw the faint tan line where it had been. I looked at her finger and saw the faint tan line where it had been. I looked at Marcus's hands in the casket. His ring was gone too. My stomach went cold. Marcus never took off that ring. Not once in 6 years. He told me the day after his wedding. Mama, this ring is the best thing I've ever put on. He wore it to cook, to sleep, to every meeting and every boardroom he ever walked into. He told me it reminded him of what he was working for. So where was it? The receiving line formed after the eulogy. I stood beside the casket and received hugs and handshakes and the hollow, gentle words that people say because there are no other words. I'm so sorry, Dorothy. He was a wonderful man. You must be so proud of everything he accomplished. And then Brandon Cole got in line. He was 44 years old, 6'1", with silver at his temples and the kind of deliberate handsomeness that comes from expensive haircuts and personal trainers. He wore a black suit that fit the way suits in magazines fit. He was an attorney, a franchise development specialist, the man Marcus had brought in 18 months ago to structure and close the $12 million deal. He'd been Marcus's business partner on paper for just over a year. He shook my hand with both of his. His grip was warm and firm, the kind of handshake they teach in business schools. Mrs. Hayes, he said, there are no words. Marcus was one of the finest men I've ever known. This is an enormous loss. Thank you, Brandon, I said. He held my hand a moment longer than necessary. I want you to know that I'm going to protect everything Marcus built. That franchise deal, his restaurants, his legacy, I'll make sure none of it falls apart. You don't need to worry about any of that. That's kind of you, I said. He nodded and moved to pay his respects at the casket. He stood there for a moment, head slightly bowed, and I watched his shoulders. They weren't the shoulders of a grieving man. They were the shoulders of a grieving man. They were the shoulders of a man calculating. Then he was back beside me. Mrs. Hayes, he said quietly. Could I have a word? Just briefly. There's something time-sensitive I need to discuss. Gloria squeezed my arm. I felt her watching. Of course, I said. We stepped into the side vestibule near the coat closet, away from the receiving line. Brandon stood close, his voice low and smooth. I'll get right to it because I respect you too much to waste your time. With Marcus gone, the franchise agreement is in a complicated legal position. His 49% stake in the holding company transfers to his estate, which means to Priya primarily, and potentially to you, depending on how probate goes. The investors are nervous. They need certainty. This is my son's funeral, Brandon. I know. I'm sorry. But if we don't act quickly, the whole deal could collapse. $12 million, all those jobs, everything Marcus worked for, it could all disappear in 60 days. He tilted his head slightly. I want to protect it. The cleanest way to do that is for me to acquire Marcus's stake at fair market value. Priya has already indicated she'd be open to it. I'd give the estate $4 million and take full controlling interest. Clean, fast, no lawyers fighting over it for years. I said nothing. $4 million is a strong offer, Brandon continued, especially given that the deal isn't closed yet and there's real execution risk. You'd have certainty. Priya would have certainty. Priya would have certainty. And Marcus's restaurants would continue operating. $4 million for a 49% stake in a $12 million deal. Less than a third of its value. And Priya had already indicated she'd be open to it. I'll think about it, I said. Something shifted behind his eyes, just briefly. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell his cologne and feel the deliberate use of his height. Mrs. Hayes, he said, his voice dropping. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know how these things go when families get involved in business they don't understand. It gets messy. It gets expensive. Lawyers take a cut. Courts drag it out. And by the time it's settled, there's nothing left worth having. He paused. Marcus was smart, but he was idealistic. He kept slowing the deal down with concerns about supplier contracts, about employee protections, things that sound good but kill momentum. The investors appreciated my ability to keep things on track. I looked at him directly. He didn't trust you, I said. It wasn't a question. It just came out. Brandon's expression didn't change. But his jaw tightened by a fraction of an inch. We had different philosophies, he said carefully. Don't take too long on my offer, Mrs. Hayes. The investor's patience has a deadline, and business doesn't pause for grief. He patted my arm once, the way you pat a child, and walked back into the sanctuary. I stood in that vestibule alone, pressing my hand flat against the wall. My son's business partner had just tried to buy me out of my son's estate at a 2/3 discount, 3 days after my son died in a single-car accident on a dry road at night. And my daughter-in-law had already said yes. I went back to my seat. Gloria looked at me. I shook my head slightly. Not now. But she'd seen Brandon's face when he walked away. She leaned close to my ear. That man didn't come here to pay his respects, she whispered. No, I said. He didn't. The burial was at Memorial Park Cemetery, under a stand of tall oaks at the back of the property. The heat had eased slightly by afternoon. We stood under a white tent and I listened to Pastor Williams say the final words, and I watched my son's casket go into the ground, and I thought about the last conversation we'd had. It was August 29th, 6 days before he died. He called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. Marcus and I had a standing Sunday call, every week without fail for the past 10 years. When he called on a Tuesday, I knew something was on his mind. Mama, can I ask you something one? Always, I said. If you found out someone you trusted was lying to you, doing something that could hurt a lot of people, what would you do? I thought about it for a moment. I'd make sure I had proof first, I said. Then I'd do whatever I had to do to make it right. He was quiet for a second. Yeah, he said. That's what I thought. I asked him what was going on. He said he'd tell me everything at Sunday dinner. He never made it to Sunday dinner. After everyone left the cemetery, I asked for a few minutes alone at the grave. The funeral home staff stepped back. I stood at the edge of the earth, and I talked to my son the way I'd talked to him his whole life, directly and without pretense. Something happened to you, I said quietly, and I'm going to find out what. That was when I noticed the hymnal. Someone had left a small burgundy hymnal on top of the flower spray draped across the casket before it was lowered. I'd assumed it was from the church, but as I reached to move it aside, it fell open. Inside the front cover, tucked flat, was a folded piece of paper. My name was written on it in my son's handwriting. I would know it anywhere. I'd graded his 4th grade book reports in that handwriting. I knew every loop and slant. My hands shook as I opened it. Mom, if you're reading this, then what I was afraid of has happened. I don't have much time to write everything down, but here's what you need to know. Brandon has been falsifying the franchise disclosure documents. He's been hiding liability claims from the investors and skimming fees through a shell company called Colwood Ventures, LLC. I've been tracking it for 2 months. I have everything documented. My business Bible is in the fireproof lockbox in my office at the Poplar Avenue restaurant. The combination is your birthday, month and day and year. Everything is in there. Contracts, emails, screenshots, a flash drive. There's also a name, Detective Angela Simmons, Financial Crimes Unit, Memphis PD. I already called her in August. She knows about me. If something happens to me, go to her. She'll know what to do. Mama, I'm scared. Brandon is not who he says he is. I'm going to the DA's office on the 10th. I just have to make it to the 10th. I love you more than anything. You always told me the truth has weight. Let it land. Your boy Marcus. I read it 3 times. The cemetery was quiet around me. A crow called from one of the oaks. He'd known something was coming, and he'd left me a roadmap. I folded the note into my purse and clasped it shut. I hear you, baby, I said. I promise. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table in the house on Goodwin Avenue, where Marcus had grown up, where he'd done his homework at the same table, where we'd eaten 10,000 meals together after his father passed. I read the note again and again until the paper softened under my fingers. I opened my laptop and typed Brandon Cole Memphis Attorney Colwood Ventures. The shell company had a registered address in Germantown. Registered September of last year, 2 months after Brandon came on board as Marcus's partner. One owner listed, Brandon Theodore Cole. Then I searched franchise disclosure document fraud and read for 2 hours. The Federal Trade Commission requires franchise sellers to provide a franchise disclosure document with accurate financial statements and litigation history. Falsifying those documents is federal fraud. If Brandon had been hiding liability claims to keep investors from walking away, he potentially exposed those investors to significant losses, and Marcus had found it. Marcus was going to the DA's office on September 10th. He died on September 3rd. At 9 o'clock the next morning, I drove to the Popper Avenue location of Hayes Family Barbecue. The manager, a young man named Darnell who'd worked for Marcus since the beginning, let me in without question. He cried a little when he saw me. I told him Marcus had asked me to retrieve some personal items from the office. The lockbox was behind the desk, bolted to the floor, exactly where Marcus kept his important documents. I knelt down, dialed my birthday, and opened it. Inside was a red hardcover notebook Marcus called his business Bible. He'd kept one since his first restaurant. Every deal, every conversation, every number, documented by hand in his careful print. I opened it to the last section. The entries were dated, methodical, and devastating. Transaction records from Colwood Ventures, receiving payments routed through the franchise holding company. Copies of altered FDD pages with handwritten notations comparing them to originals. A printed email chain in which Brandon told an investor that there were, in his words, no material litigation concerns. In the same month that Marcus had documented 3 active supplier lawsuits. A flash drive taped to the inside back cover. At the bottom of the lockbox was a small envelope with Detective Simmons written on it in Marcus's hand. I called the number inside as soon as I got to my car. Detective Simmons. Her voice was direct, unhurried. My name is Dorothy Hayes. I'm Marcus Hayes' mother. My son called you in August. A pause. Then, Mrs. Hayes, I've been hoping you'd call. I'm very sorry about Marcus. Where are you right now? I told her. Don't go home yet, she said. There's a Panera on Union. Can you be there in 20 minutes? Detective Angela Simmons was 43 years old, black with natural hair pulled back and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She wore a plain blazer and looked like someone who had heard every version of every story and still chose to care about getting it right. She stood when I walked in and shook my hand firmly. Marcus first contacted me on August 14th, she said, once we'd sat. He brought me preliminary documentation on the Colwood Ventures scheme. Enough to open a file, not enough to make an arrest. We needed more time to trace the money and subpoena the investor communications. She paused. He was supposed to bring me the full documentation on September 10. He was killed on September 3rd, I said. Yes. Her voice was even, but her eyes were not. The accident investigation is still technically open. Single vehicle, nighttime, dry conditions. No mechanical failure found in the preliminary report. The full forensic review of the vehicle hasn't been completed. You think it wasn't an accident? I think there are questions that haven't been answered yet, and I think the timing is worth examining very carefully. I put the business Bible and the flash drive on the table between us. She looked at them for a moment, then she looked at me. Where did you find these? I told her about the note in the hymnal. The lockbox. All of it. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a small yellow legal pad. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Hayes, I want to be honest with you. What you've brought me today significantly advances this investigation. The flash drive alone, if it contains what Marcus indicated, may be enough for a warrant. But I have to manage your expectations. Financial fraud investigations take time, and if there's a connection between the fraud and Marcus's death, proving that is a separate, much harder case. What do we need? We need Brandon Cole to think he's safe. We need him to keep operating, keep communicating with his co-conspirators, keep moving money. People who think they've gotten away with something always get careless. She looked at me steadily. We also need to understand Priya's role. Do you know how much she knew? I thought about Priya agreeing to Brandon's offer before Marcus was even in the ground. I thought about the wedding ring on the chain around her neck in the receiving line, like a trophy. I thought about my son calling me on a Tuesday, asking what to do when someone you trusted was lying to you. I don't know yet, I said. Then that's our next step. We find out. Detective Simmons assigned a plainclothes detail to my house that I never saw but always felt. She was careful, thorough, and she communicated with me every other day in brief texts that said only what was necessary. On September 12th, 6 days after the funeral, I invited Priya to lunch. We met at a cafe in East Memphis that Marcus had liked, a quiet place with booths in the back. Priya arrived 5 minutes late. looking polished and pale. She ordered herbal tea and barely touched it. "How are you holding up?" she asked me. Her voice was soft. "Practiced." "Not well," I said. "I've been going through some of Marcus's papers, trying to understand the business situation, the deal. There was so much I didn't know about. Of course, it's overwhelming." She stirred her tea. "Brandon is handling all of that. You shouldn't have to worry about any of it." "He made me an offer," I said, "for Marcus's stake." Her expression didn't shift, but her hands went still on the cup. "He mentioned that to me too. I think it's the right call, honestly. For both of us. It lets us close the estate and move forward." "I found some documents Marcus left behind," I said, keeping my voice uncertain, confused. "In his office, financial records, a notebook. There were some things written in there about the deal that I didn't understand. References to a company I'd never heard of. Something called Colwood." The color left her face. "Just for a second, just enough." "I don't know what that is," she said carefully. "No? Marcus had written your name near some of the entries. I assumed maybe he talked to you about it." "My name?" Her voice was very still. "And Brandon's. There were transfers listed, dates, amounts. I didn't know what they meant. I've shown them to someone, a financial advisor my friend recommended. He's reviewing everything." Priya set down her cup. "Tiffany, Marcus was under enormous stress in the last few months. Sometimes when people are overwhelmed, they see patterns that aren't there. It's possible he misunderstood something completely ordinary." "That's possible," I said, standing slowly, pressing my hand to my lower back the way my knees sometimes make me do. "I just needed to hear that from someone who loved him." "Thank you, sweetheart." I hugged her at the door. She hugged me back. Her arms were rigid. I didn't look back as I walked to my car. But I didn't have to. Detective Simmons called that evening. Priya called Brandon 12 minutes after you left the restaurant. They talked for 9 minutes. He drove to her house at 7:40 p.m. and stayed for just over 3 hours. "We don't have audio yet, but we have the pattern." She paused. "They're scared." "Good work, Mrs. Hayes." "What happens now?" "The flash drive. Our digital forensics team has been through it. There are 1,400 files. Emails, wire transfer records, original FDD documents alongside Brandon's altered versions, and..." She stopped. "And what?" "There's a video. Marcus recorded himself on his phone 2 days before he died. He's sitting in his car and he talks for 11 minutes directly to camera. He lays out everything. The fraud, the timeline, the evidence, what he suspects Brandon will do if he finds out. He names Priya as someone Brandon has been using as an intermediary, passing information about Marcus's movements and schedule." Her voice was careful. "He also says he confronted Brandon on September 1st, 2 days before the accident." The room went very quiet around me. "Marcus told Brandon he had documentation and was going to the DA. Detective Simmons continued. "He says in the recording that Brandon laughed and told him to go ahead, that nothing would stick. But Marcus sounds frightened. He says, and I want to quote this directly because I think you should hear it, 'If something happens to me before the 10th, it wasn't an accident. I need someone to know that. I need it on record.'" I pressed my hand over my mouth. "We're requesting a warrant for the vehicle forensic data tonight," she said gently. "And we're requesting a full digital warrant for Brandon's communications. Mrs. Hayes, your son was thorough. He was careful. He made sure we'd have what we need." On September 19th, Detective Simmons and 2 other detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit, accompanied by investigators from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, brought Brandon Cole in for questioning. He came with his own attorney, calm, confident, in a dark green cashmere sweater. He sat across the table from Detective Simmons and spoke in the measured, cooperative tone of a man who had been trained to seem trustworthy. He denied everything. He called the wire transfers consulting fees properly documented. He called Colwood Ventures a legitimate entity used for deal structuring. He said Marcus had been paranoid in his final months, overworked, misinterpreting normal business activity. His attorney objected at every turn. Then Detective Simmons played 12 seconds of Marcus's video recording. Just 12 seconds. Marcus's voice from his own phone in his own car saying Brandon Cole altered the FDD filings and has been diverting funds through Colwood Ventures since October of last year. "I have every transaction documented." Brandon's attorney asked for a recess. Brandon did not come out of that recess the same man who went in. His attorney negotiated for 3 hours. What came out of those negotiations was not a confession, but it was something nearly as useful. Brandon agreed to provide full access to his financial records in exchange for the possibility of a reduced charge on the fraud counts. He believed, his attorney said, that cooperation on the financial crimes would protect him from anything else. He had no idea what the vehicle forensic team had found. On September 23rd, the TBI announced that the data recovered from Marcus's vehicle showed evidence of remote interference with the car's electronic stability control system. The technology exists, Detective Simmons explained to me quietly, and it leaves traces if you know where to look. A specialist with access to the right equipment could disable a car's stability systems and steering response remotely, causing a driver to lose control. The investigation was formally reclassified from accident to suspected homicide. Brandon's cooperation agreement fell apart the moment his attorney heard the word homicide. Priya's cooperation agreement was what actually broke the case. She asked to speak to Detective Simmons alone without Brandon's knowledge on September 26th. I was in the observation room, behind the glass, holding Gloria's hand. Priya sat at the table in a plain gray sweater. She looked nothing like the composed, photogenic woman from the funeral. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks, which I suspected was true. She didn't try to explain herself at first. She just said, "I want to tell you what happened." What happened was this. 8 months ago in January, Brandon had come to Priya with what she described as a business conversation. He told her that Marcus was about to make a mistake that would cost them everything. That Marcus's insistence on protecting certain supplier contracts was going to kill the franchise deal and leave them all with nothing. He said he needed Priya to help him manage Marcus, to redirect his attention, to keep him from looking too closely at certain financial arrangements. Priya had known about the financial arrangements. She'd known because Brandon had been sending payments to a personal account she kept separately from the household accounts, not as much as he told her he would. $60,000 over 7 months. She told herself it was a finder's fee. She told herself Marcus would never know. She told herself she was protecting their future. When Marcus found the discrepancies in March and started investigating, Brandon had told Priya to monitor Marcus's calendar, his meetings, his communications, to report back anything that suggested he was meeting with investigators or attorneys. She had told herself she was just buying time, that it would resolve itself, that Brandon would figure something out that didn't require anyone to get hurt. On September 1st, Marcus confronted Brandon directly. Priya had not been there, but Brandon called her immediately afterward. He said Marcus had proof. He said there was only one way to make it stop. She told Detective Simmons she had said no. She said she told Brandon she was done, that she wanted out, that they should come clean. Brandon had told her that if she said anything, he would tell Marcus about the payments, that Marcus would know she'd been helping Brandon steal from him, that she'd been spying on her own husband, that everything would be destroyed anyway, except she'd go to prison and Marcus would hate her for the rest of his life. She said she hadn't known what Brandon planned to do. She said she had believed him when he told her the accident was real, that it was a terrible coincidence. She said she had spent the 6 days between Marcus's death and his funeral telling herself it was a coincidence. And then Brandon had shown up on the morning of the funeral and told her to sign the company papers as soon as probate cleared. And she had understood with absolute certainty that she'd been refusing to feel, that there was no coincidence. "I knew," she said to Detective Simmons. Her voice was flat and empty. "I didn't do it, but I let it happen. I didn't stop him. I didn't warn Marcus. I am sitting here because I am a coward, and because I told myself that what I didn't directly cause wasn't my fault." She pressed both hands flat on the table. "It was my fault." She provided dates, times, communications. She told them about the calendar access she'd given Brandon. She confirmed the September 1st confrontation. She handed over her own phone. Brandon Cole was arrested on October 4th, 2024 at Memphis International Airport. He had a one-way ticket to Cancun, $412,000 in a carry-on bag, and a second passport in a different name. He was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, securities fraud, and attempted flight to avoid prosecution. Priya pleaded guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges. At her sentencing, she stood and faced me in the gallery and said things I had already decided I would not respond to. Not because I was gracious, but because I owed her nothing. She said she was sorry. She said Marcus deserved better. She said she hoped someday I could forgive her. I looked at her and I thought about my son recording himself in his car because he was scared and he needed someone to know the truth, and I said nothing at all. The judge sentenced her to 11 years. Brandon's trial lasted 4 weeks. His defense argued the vehicle data was inconclusive, that the forensic specialist could not establish with certainty that the interference was remote rather than a mechanical failure of independent origin. His defense argued that Marcus had been an unstable and paranoid business partner who had manufactured a conspiracy narrative to sabotage Brandon's career. His defense argued that testimony was self-serving and unreliable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. On December 14, 2024, Brandon Cole was convicted on all counts. At sentencing, the judge allowed me to make a statement. I wore the navy dress Marcus had given me for my retirement party 6 years ago. He'd said, "Mama, you have to have something new for your last day. You gave those kids 35 years. You deserve to celebrate." I stood at the podium. The courtroom was full. Press, families, strangers who'd followed the case. I looked at Brandon in his orange jumpsuit. "Your Honor, my name is Dorothy Mae Hayes. I am 67 years old. I am a retired school teacher. I am a widow. And I am the mother of Marcus Raymond Hayes, the man Brandon Cole murdered. Marcus was my only child. His father worked 2 jobs and I worked 1. And on weekends we catered church dinners out of our kitchen so that Marcus could go to culinary school. Marcus took everything we gave him and he built something honest and real. He fed people. He employed people. He donated meals and gave scholarships and called me every Sunday without fail for 10 years. Brandon Cole looked at what Marcus built and decided it belonged to him. He stole from it methodically and carefully, and when Marcus found out and chose to do the right thing, Brandon decided Marcus's life was an obstacle to be removed. And then he stood at my son's funeral and told me not to worry. He told me he would take better care of that $12 million than Marcus ever did. I want Brandon Cole to know something. I am a 4th grade teacher from South Memphis. I have never run a company or argued a case or investigated a crime, but I raised a son who documented everything and trusted his mother with the truth. And I am a woman who spent 35 years teaching children that the truth has weight and that it lands where it needs to land. Brandon Cole thought I was an obstacle too, an old woman, a grieving mother, someone to pat on the arm and send home. He thought that if he moved fast enough and smiled wide enough and spoke smoothly enough, I would sign away my son's life's work and disappear. He was wrong. Marcus is gone. Nothing gives him back to me. Nothing fills the house on Goodwin Avenue or replaces the Sunday calls, or brings back the smell of his grandmother's sauce that he kept in the freezer for special occasions. Justice is not the same as healing. I want anyone listening to understand that. But Brandon Cole will spend the rest of his life in a cell knowing that a retired schoolteacher and her dead son's notebook were smarter than he was. And that is what justice looks like when truth has weight. Thank you. The judge sentenced Brandon Cole to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It is February of 2025 now, and I am sitting on the porch of the house on Goodwin Avenue drinking my morning coffee. Memphis in February is cold and gray, and the magnolia in the front yard is just beginning to bud. I've been sitting on this porch for 30 years, and I expect to sit on it for 30 more. Darnell still runs the Poplar Avenue restaurant. All 3 locations are open. The franchise deal was restructured by a new attorney, a woman named Keisha Tate, who Marcus had actually consulted with the summer before he died, who told me when we first met that Marcus had spoken very highly of his mother. The deal is smaller now, 8 locations instead of 22, but it is clean and it is real. And it has Marcus's name on it the way he always intended. In January, I started something I'm calling the Hayes Family Truth Fund. It's small right now. Me and Detective Simmons and Gloria and Pastor Williams on the board. We help families who suspect their loved one's death was not what the first report said. We help them find the right people to talk to, the right questions to ask, the right documents to look for. We've worked with 3 families so far. 1 case led to a new investigation. 2 are still open. Last week, a man came to my door. He was maybe 30, thin, with careful eyes and a folder tucked under his arm. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "my name is David. My father died 4 months ago. The police said it was a heart attack, but he was 61 and healthy, and his business partner filed to take over the company 3 days after he was buried. My father's accountant said the books don't add up. I don't have money for a lawyer. I found your foundation online. I looked at this young man standing on my porch in the February cold. I saw every person who had ever been told to accept something that didn't feel right, to be grateful for the offer on the table, to not make trouble because grief has a way of clouding your judgment. Come in, I said. Let me put on more coffee. Tell me everything. They thought they knew what I was. An old woman alone in a big house, soft with grief, easy to manage. I am Dorothy May Hayes. I am 67 years old. I am the daughter of a woman who scrubbed other people's floors so her children could go to school with clean shoes. I am the widow of a man who never stopped working and never once complained. I am the mother of a murdered son who believed the truth was worth dying for. I am also the woman who kept his business Bible, followed his roadmap, and made sure the people who killed him will never see the outside of a prison. Not because I am fearless. I was afraid every single day of this. Not because I am extraordinary. I am ordinary in every way that matters. But my son left me a truth, and I carried it where it needed to go. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, holding a truth that someone powerful wants you to put down and walk away from, I want you to know one thing. The truth has weight. Let it land. Drop your city in the comments and tell me whether you believe justice is still possible where you live. And if this story reached you, if it reminded you of someone you loved or something you fought for, please share it. Marcus's story is not just one family's story. From my kitchen table to wherever you are watching this, stay steady. Trust what you know. And never let anyone make you feel small for asking the question they don't want you to ask. I'm Dorothy Hayes, and this is my truth. God bless you all.